teams with the problems that arise from running complex systems. I've been writing software for over 15 years. Last 2 jobs were namely HR and DigitalOcean, both here in New York City. Before that, I also worked for companies like Beats by Dre, Merck Pharmaceuticals, and a few other things that aren't really worth mentioning. But a lot of my last half of my career has been primarily focused on developer happiness. And a lot of that came from implementing CI/CD. I've spoken at Spinnaker Summit a few times. I've installed Kubernetes since it was 1.2. I've done all time, and that actually was probably the opposite of developer happiness at that point. It was the exact opposite, but had to do a lot of work to fix some of those problems. Another thing about me is that I am a road tripper, traveling the length of the United States twice, in Canada once, and many other random ones. I actually sold my car like 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago. I just bought another one, so I'm trying to figure out where that road trip, what the next one is going to be. Well, let's just jump right into it. Let's talk about incidents. So what even is an incident? There's all types of different classifications that you might hear. What is a bug an incident? Is a bug that 5,000 people experiencing an incident? Where's the line? And so what I went down this rabbit hole and I started asking, like, what is an incident? And the general idea that every dictionary says is that it's an individual occurrence or event. Dictionary.com, Merriam-Webster has its own version, Lexico.com, same exact story. And I thought that that was interesting because that doesn't mean anything bad. An individual occurrence or event, that's not a bad thing. However, we consistently use it in a negative connotation. So basically, incident just means anything that can happen, which is weird. So why do we use it so negatively? We say like an email incident. If I were to say that to an engineer, they're going to think, oh, maybe we sent 100,000 emails to the wrong address. A deploy incident, it could be a totally great thing. But if you say a deploy incident, it's going to come out negatively. I could say a meetup incident, and like Bobby's talk was like a 5 out of 7. These are all things that if you use the word incident, they pretty much always have a negative connotation when we perceive it. So I wasn't satisfied. So I went to the Stack Exchange English Substack, whatever they call it there, and I asked the question, why does the word incident have a negative connotation? And Weathervane, in his infinite knowledge, provided, because that's its typical usage. So incredibly valuable insight from Weathervane, and really prompting this incredible animation to say, the more you know. Jokes aside, the internet did eventually help. There is a website called etymology.com. I was able to look at the word incident, and it's a euphemistic meaning event that might trigger a crisis or political unrest, first attested in 1913. I thought, oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense based on the context that we consistently use it in, because it was further solidified as crisis or unrest on February 28th of 2017, when the entire internet went down when S3 died from Amazon. Zoom is kind of weird. I'm just going to assume people are laughing. Next slide. However, one of the things about incidents is that they provide a unique opportunity to unearth the situations that we never predicted. That's what an incident is. It's a situation that we did not anticipate to happen. And so what you kind of have to do is you have to learn how to learn from incidents. So really, really important concept is the retrospective. In a lot of places, they are called postmortems. I'm trying to move away, and FireHydrant has taken this position as well, is that we're moving away from the word postmortem and we call them incident retrospectives. Reason being, nobody died, plain and simple. If you do run software that someone could potentially die, then yeah, maybe it's a proper term, but frankly, that's not the case most of the time. So the other things I want to talk about, though, are the scheduling and the responsibilities that kind of come with these retrospective meetings. And one thing that I see across the board at, like, I don't know, I'm going to say 8 out of 10 organizations is that they will dilly-dally on scheduling the actual retrospective meeting. So the reality is that these lose data pretty consistently. Like, our memories are more RAM than they are hard drives. And we have to make sure that we are getting to the incident retrospectives as fast as possible so we can start to actually use them to learn the most that we can possibly can before we start losing like the little details. And every day that you don't have that meeting, you're losing critical memories about what actually happened. You can actually start to come up with false memories. So my proposal, do it within 3 business days, no matter what. People can cancel meetings and move them around. You can move a stand-up. You cannot attend a stand-up one day if it means that the entire responder group gets to meet. That's far more important than a stand-up that day. So you really should treat these retrospectives meetings as like sacred. And if one person is talking the whole time, I've been a member of this, and I'm going to be honest, I've done it myself. It's the wrong way to do it. Because the reality is that everyone should have questions about this incident. Everyone should have a story about this incident. You're going to have different perspectives about this incident across the board. And it's important and critical that you unearth all of those perspectives, because that's going to give you the best portrayal of the incident. And in the early days, a recommendation that I have is that managers should really help facilitate. And after a while, though, stay outside. And I know there may be some managers here, and you might just like rage quit this meetup right now, but the presence of a manager can stifle a conversation, whether you like it or not. And review the report that comes out of the meeting and ask questions then, but your presence, if you are there to listen, is not helping the team. Because there might be a member of the team that ran a command that made things worse. They're not going to say anything if you're sitting in the meeting. And there's a good chance of it. Unless you have this incredible culture of blamelessness, which is incredibly difficult to achieve, you being there as a manager is not helpful a lot of the time. So tell me if this sounds familiar. If you run retrospectives at your company and you had an office, this might sound familiar to you. Incident retrospective is scheduled a week from the resolution date for 1 hour. So let's say we had an incident that stopped right now. We would schedule a meeting for Thursday or Friday of next week for 1 hour. And this incident went on for 5 hours today. All of the incident responders are then going to cram into a conference room. One is sitting on the floor because there's no room. Another person is sharing their screen onto a TV and is copying and pasting Slack messages into a Confluence document because that's incredibly valuable. After 45 minutes of putting together a timeline, you fill out the 5 whys for 10 minutes. Meanwhile, another engineer is barely paying attention, and they're actually just clicking around Datadog looking for something that might be of relevance to what triggered this incident. Another engineer is looking at logs, they're looking at Splunk, they're looking at Loki to try to figure out any sign of root cause, which isn't real. And then the last 5 minutes are creating Jira tickets to fix things like auto-scaling, which will never happen. Because when you create a ticket that way, it's way too big. What does fix auto-scaling even mean? And you're going to create 10 of these for a team of 4 software engineers who are already super busy to go and do? Doesn't work. You can't do it that way. It's ineffective to run a retro this way. It's a waste of an hour. Don't even bother having a retro meeting if you are going to run it that way. The reality is you need outcomes, and the first one that you should have is learning, plain and simple. And once you've learned as much as you possibly can about that incident, then you can create actions. Pasting something from Slack into a Confluence document is not learning. You're not learning a damn thing at that point. You're checking off a box to say that you did something. And if you complete a report with 10 or more contributing factors, that is successful. You could omit a timeline. That's okay. If you have 10 things that contributed to an incident and that's the only thing that you come out of a retrospective with, that's actually a success. You need to make sure that you take steps to prevent similar actions in the future, but don't overextend. Small steps are better for you and your complex system almost every single time. You can't come out of an incident and you're going to have an engineer who's really confident in everything that they do, and they're going to say, "Oh, I'm going to switch us from Amazon to Google Cloud." It's like, okay, let's take a step back. That's going to cause far more problems than this incident caused. So you do have to think, like, what's a happy medium of where I'm going to have the most outcome from an incident? So a sane alternative here is, depending on the severity, it's recommended to have multiple meetings. An hour-long meeting for a 3-hour-long incident is not enough. You're not going to accomplish the things that you need to accomplish in 1 hour for a 3-hour incident. You're going to scratch the surface. Because the first 30 minutes are going to be like complaining about the incident, like you're not going to get a whole lot done. So you can do an incident retro over multiple meetings. That's okay. But I don't see a lot of companies do this. We all treat an incident retrospective meeting as a 1-hour affair to say that we did something, but that's not why we should be doing them. And you should have a timeline of the incident. You should. It helps contextualize the incident. But only including chat is pointless. Don't do it. You need to provide context for each item in your timeline. If you selected it out of chat to put into a document, there's a reason for that. And if you're not including the why and the context of why that's in your retrospective document, there's no point to add it. Because then what you're doing is you're allowing the rest of your team to come up with their own reasoning as to why it's there. And now you might have even more versions of the incident perspective than you actually want. You should all be on the same page about an incident, because if I type out something about contextualizing a timeline event, and what I type is disagreed with an engineer, that's an interesting talking point. So you should be able to unearth those things. And this is a good segue into this third bullet point, which is every person in your incident has a different perspective. You should ask why they were thinking, what they were thinking at different intervals. You should ask what their perspective was about when we saw this graph about high memory or high CPU, what were you thinking? Because what they're thinking might be totally different from what I'm thinking. And if you're able to get all of the perspectives out into the open, you can really actually distill it into something that's meaningful. And you can each understand each other even more. And the other thing that you should also realize when you go into these retros is that a lot of your incidents timeline is basically a culmination of assumptions. If I'm posting a graph to something, I'm assuming that that graph is relevant. It might not be. And you might realize after you post it, oh, actually that graph is not useful. And that's okay, because that you're whittling away at the little things that might actually not be, they might be red herrings. But you should operate under the assumption that you are assuming things, and other people will have their own assumptions. And that means that you have to communicate because you need to understand each other when you go into these retro meetings. And there's a common theme that people say, it's like ask 5 whys, and I think that's fine, and it's a nice tool in the tool belt to spark a conversation. But the reality is that you should be asking 5 whys for every single thing in your timeline, because why is this here? I think it's here because of this. Well, why did that happen? And like now you can start to basically create a tree of your timeline, because incident timelines are not linear. They happen there are asynchronous events happening during an incident the entire time. So that's why you need to be asking these 5 whys, is to basically create this B tree of incident data. The other thing that you must do is you have to tell a story. So you should have some initial questions to basically like start an incident retrospective. It's a little bit like a first date. Like you have your questions that you always ask. Like you can have a list of those things to start conversation. That's okay. It's a good strategy. And you can ask very simple things. What assumptions did you have at the start of the incident? This is the easiest way to start a conversation. Oh, I assumed it was a bad migration. Okay, why did you think it was a bad migration? And then now you can start to dive into why that assumption existed. You should also ask questions. Why do you think X was an issue? It might not have been an issue. Was there a log line that made you generate a hypothesis? Did an alert make you go down a path that is wrong? This is a great one, right? You might have an alert that woke someone up, but that alert wasn't the alert that was really part of the issue. It was an upstream service that was triggering it. And what tools did you use to investigate? And this is a good one too, because there might be 4 or 5 other people in the team that don't know how to do something. And more often than not, we have the old guard or the cowboys or the Brents of the world that will do everything. And then it's just magical and the incident's resolved. So if you're trying to just get information out of someone who's a hero during an incident, it's important to ask them, what tools did you use? What techniques did you use? Because that person isn't going to be there every day. You need to start spreading around your investigation and triage knowledge. Retro facilitators should have a few questions they want to ask before every review. Before they go into that review, have a few things that you're going to ask that you need answers for. Don't follow the hype. You don't need 5 whys. You don't need a timeline. You don't need mean time to anything. You need to understand what state caused your system into an incident. That sentence doesn't make sense on my slide, but that's really what I'm trying to say is you just need to understand how your system got into that state in the first place. The other points are just ways to help get there. You don't have to do it, but if you're looking for tools to get to the point of understanding what caused a certain state within your system, yeah, 5 whys might be able to help you. But don't do 5 whys just because everyone else in Google tells you to do it. That's the wrong reason. So once you have an understanding, you need to act. So learning from incidents is pointless if you don't change anything. There are a few people in the incident response community that would flat out disagree with me and throw something at me if we were in an office. But my opinion is that if you're not going to change something from an incident, there's really no reason to do a retrospective. But it doesn't have to be one thing, and I have this at the bottom here. You don't have to do like a super material change. You can change the way that an incident alerts. You can change the words in an incident or in an alert. You can change how an alert actually, you can add an alert that just alerts that system state earlier, so it doesn't affect customers. There's all types of little things that you can do that require no code at all. Because you don't want to change too much, because you're going to cause more chaos. If you go into a situation and you just all of a sudden start shifting from Amazon to Google or changing from ELBs to ALBs to NLBs, like, you're going to cause more chaos. I can tell you personally that changing a load balancer type is not going to help you immediately. You're going to cause more problems. And a single task that you can do within a month is better than 10 tasks that you will never do. I know of a company that when they have a retro, they create 1 action item. Doesn't matter if they want to create 10, they only allow 1 to come out of that retro. And they do it every time, which is way better. Now, that's kind of like the more monologue-y part of this talk. There's the second part, and we are going to talk about something that might be a little sensitive to people, so I am putting a warning here, is we are going to talk about a flight incident. So, you know, if you want to step away or, you know, if you're done at that point, come back in 15 minutes, it'll probably be over. But moving along, we are going to talk about Air France 447. Now, Air France 447 flew on June 1st, 2009. It was flying from Rio de Janeiro to Paris when it crashed in the Atlantic Ocean. It took 2 years to discover the flight recorders, which was what the final investigation report was actually based on. It took 5 days to actually recover parts of the wreckage from the Brazilian military. But it was a hunt to find this aircraft to figure out what happened. France actually had a nuclear submarine in the Atlantic Ocean looking for the aircraft parts using its sonar. It was a big deal, and it had a lot of mystery because this plane basically vanished. And the reality of it, which we'll talk about here, is it was confusion amongst pilots that actually triggered this unfortunate disaster. So there's something that you need to consider that happens before every incident, which is there's a before every incident. The start of an incident is usually when anomalies are detected. That's what we put in our systems. When did the incident start? And then we'll say, when I saw this graph line trending up. That's not really when an incident started. There's a lot of things that go into actually kicking off and putting a system into a state that has an incident. But they go unnoticed a lot of the time. And in Air France 447 case, there were a few things that went on before the incident that are extremely likely to have contributed to the accident. For example, they experienced good amount of turbulence. There were points in which the aircraft was tilting 40 degrees. To give you an idea, 40 degrees, that's a hard roll to the right. It also experienced St. Elmo's fire, which is an electrical event that as passengers you can't always see, but it's very common amongst pilots. And they were also flying through a tropical storm. All of this happened before the incident actually started. So this incident happened between in 4 minutes and 23 seconds. But at around 2 a.m., 2:10 a.m., there's something on a plane called a pitot tube. And a pitot tube, what it's responsible for is actually measuring airspeed. Every plane has one. If you're looking at a plane that's sitting at the gate, you can actually see them on the front. So on the screenshot here, those little things, those little hooks pointing forward, that's a pitot tube. That's how the plane knows how fast it's going in the air. Now, the co-pilot at this point, the pitot tube freezes, and it causes a loss of airspeed information. And what that does, the Airbus A330 is designed to turn off autopilot at that point. And what happens is standard is that the co-pilot takes control of the aircraft, but in taking control of the aircraft, unfortunately pitches the nose of the plane upward. Now, what happens when you're at altitude and you start going up more and more and more, because this nose is now, they're climbing, is it can cause a situation called an aerodynamic stall. And the plane's computer knows this. The A330 was helpful and did say that there is a stall warning. And a stall warning is not a subtle thing. That's a key point here. A stall warning in an aircraft is impossible to ignore. It's going to yell at you, it's going to say stall, stall, and then something called a cricket. A cricket is so loud that it can be heard in the actual plane. Like passengers can hear a cricket. It is that serious of an alert. Now, when this happens, the co-pilot actually pulls on the stick even more and starts pushing the plane past its maximum altitude of 38,000 feet with its nose at a 15-degree angle. You take off very commonly at a 10 to 12 degree angle. In high altitude places like Denver, you're taking off at like 7 to 8. So 15 degrees is an extreme climb for a passenger airliner. The stall sound at this point throughout the incident sounded 75 times, but was not mentioned once on the black box recording of the pilots. There's a lot of other conversation that's going on, but they don't once acknowledge the stall warning that's actually going on in the aircraft. And after some time, they still don't know if they're ascending or descending. Because when you don't have your pitot tubes, you lose a lot of other diagnostic information on the aircraft. So they were at 10,000 feet. They were dropping from 38,000 feet to 10,000 feet, and they still didn't know what altitude they were at. They had no idea if they were descending or ascending. And the captain at this point is actually asleep. The plane was being flown by a co-pilot and another co-pilot, I suppose. And the captain is made aware of this by stewardess. And what happens is the captain actually comes back into the cockpit from sleeping, asks what's going on, and kind of takes stock of the situation. And keep in mind, they are losing altitude at a crazy descent. They are at a 45-degree descent, angle of descent. And the plane is basically doing this. So when you go into an aerodynamic stall, the entire plane goes into something called buffeting. And buffeting is something that the plane is no longer in its optimal aerodynamic design. So the entire plane shakes. Not like turbulent shake, like violent shaking. And at that point, you can imagine the stress that's causing these pilots. So another alarm starts to sound at 2,000 feet. And after the captain realizes and tells them, hey, you have to push your nose down. Don't try to climb, push your nose down. Captain realized what was going on. And a new alarm starts sounding at 2,000 feet when they realized this at about 10,000. And they pushed the nose down. The airplane did start to regain speed. However, at 2,000 feet, you can no longer push the nose down more to regain speed. That's a bad problem when you're in a stall situation. You're going 115 miles an hour and you're on a long haul plane that weighs 200 tons. So the co-pilot, without notifying the other, hears this new notification, the 2,000 feet warning, and takes control again of the plane and pulls the stick back all the way. There's another flaw here that I forgot to mention, is that the Airbus A330 has something called asynchronous sticks. And what that means is that if I am a co-pilot and I have a pilot to my right, if I pull the stick back, that other pilot doesn't know I'm doing it unless I say something. On Boeing 737s and really any Boeing model, if I pull the stick back, it's mechanical. It's going to pull that one back too. So what was happening is that the pilots were actually canceling each other out. And they didn't know that because they weren't communicating. So about a few seconds go by from 2,000 feet, and then the Airbus crashed into the Atlantic Ocean, and no one survived. Now, this is a super sad story, right? It was incredibly hard to even put this together. It's super sad. But there are a lot of things that can be learned from it. There are mechanical errors here. There are factors of human errors here. And there is actually controversy around, was it human error or was it mechanical? I'm not going to put my opinion on that. Before autopilot was disengaged, though, Air France 447 was experiencing turbulence as well as St. Elmo's fire. It's very likely Bronin, a young co-pilot who was 31 years old, was in a completely different mindset. The brain of someone changes consistently, and this is why the before an incident is super important. People are always going to do what they think is best to mitigate an incident. It's very rare that I've never experienced this, that somebody is nefarious and going to try to make the incident worse. It just doesn't happen. Bronin was only doing things that he thought would actually solve the problem. And with a mechanical failure on the pitot tubes, it causes Bronin to take control of the aircraft at a time he was not expecting to. He had plenty of reasons to not trust the instruments during the incident as well. Angle of attack, for example, is something that is calculated based on thrust of the aircraft and airspeed. the state of the aircraft eventually led the cockpit to go into something, and by cockpit I mean the pilots, to go into something that's called cognitive tunneling. And what that basically means is that our brains become so laser focused onto something that we will ignore the outside world. And what had happened to Bronin here is that he thought that they were descending. And what he was doing is pulling the stick back, pulling to climb, and he put the plane into something called toga, which is to take off. It's the highest amount of energy that you can give the engines on a plane. So he was in toga pulling back on the plane because he thought that he was not angled correctly because he didn't have the right diagnostics to tell him. Even with plenty of other indicators, however, the co-pilots did not correctly correct the problem by pushing the nose of the aircraft down. So I'm going to say something, I'm going to contradict a few folks that are pretty prominent in the incident community, but I don't believe that there is human root cause. I think there are certain things that humans contribute to send systems into a tizzy like Air France 447. And there's actually a paper about this, but the reality is that a loss of reliable information, mechanical, plus cognitive tunneling, human, are some of the largest factors into why Air France 447 crashed. So there's a paper called Irony of Automation, and it does talk about this, pretty much exactly this scenario, is that physical skills deteriorate when they are not used, particularly the refinements of gain and timing. This means that a formerly experienced operator who has been monitoring an automated process may now be an inexperienced one. If he takes over, they may set the process into oscillation. That's exactly what happened in Air France 447. So what can we learn from this? It's critically important to have a crisp understanding of why an incident occurs. This may be discovered through a timeline, 5 whys, logs. There are plenty of tools out there to make this a reality. But none of this matters and is a waste of your time if you don't change something either about yourself or organizationally. There are hundreds of human safety stories to learn from, to learn how to learn from incidents. Go find them. So action items. What happened in lieu of this tragedy? Well, Air France actually replaced all of the Pitot tubes in their fleet with new ones from a different company after seeing consistent problems. There was another instance not more than 4 months after Air France 447 where a plane in the same exact spot also lost communication with it. The Pitot tubes also froze over on that plane. There are many other cases from Miami to Paris where this also happened with Air France. So they had all the reports, they had a tragedy, they replaced all of the tubes on all their planes. Another thing that came to light is that pilots were not being trained to handle cruise speed incidents like this. So more training was for cruising altitude scenarios actually came about from this. There's a lot of training for takeoff and landing, but when it came at that time, there was not a lot of training for cruising altitude incidents, specifically this one. So those were 2 large things that actually came out of this incident. So really quickly, the thing that we should all remember as software operators and builders is that incidents are inevitable. They are going to happen. And you need to really put them under a microscope to create meaningful follow-up items. You can change the future of your business by learning from these incidents. There are plenty of things that I've done in my career because of experience of an incident in my past. Or another way to say this is that experience is not knowing what to do, it's knowing what not to do. And having a lot of these incidents and learning from them is that experience. So I'm going to change my tone of voice. I'm going to say thank you for coming to this quick little talk. My name is Robert Ross. People call me Bobby Tables. I would check out Fire Hydrant if you do want to learn from every incident that you have. A few folks here if you want to chat. I'm also happy to stick around and drink a cocktail and talk incidents. But thank you, everyone.
Bobby, thanks. Much appreciated. I noticed there's no questions in the chat. When it comes to incident response, you're talking to an absolute expert in the field. If you guys have any questions, throw them out there. He's very good at fielding them. Fire away.
Actually, not so much of a question, but just a couple of things to add. And yes, Bobby, you're quite correct in a lot of your points. Drawing experience as an operations manager, and one thing we had regarding the timing, more often than not, and going to the etymology of the word that you brought up was actually quite funny. Postmortems or incident retrospectives, as you call them, they're very political, especially in an age where, technologies are competing, workforce tensions are high and things like that. And I guess I'm drawing experience from having worked in larger, more old school corporations. One thing we did have, though, is I created an incident response leader. And that person, they also had a backup, so it was considered them a team. Basically, they were the scribes. As from the moment the incident was reported to the life cycle of the incident to the postmortem, and ultimately they were the ones responsible for drafting all these postmortems and all of that. The thing is, and they're also separate from the actual engineers that are fixing the problem. They're essentially, they're the scribes, they're taking notes of everything that's happening, and they're not fixing the problem. You separate those duties. But more often than not, by the time you compile all that data, by the time you are able to present it, and more often than not, a lot of these incidents go up to C-level executives, there's a lot of cleaning up that's done. And I had to do a lot of these presentations when I was incident leader, where I ended up presenting 10 days into it. But I agree 100%, you're not going to wait 10 days until you get the Slack messages and all that stuff. Data collection starts at the start of the incident. But unfortunately, there's a lot of politics that go with postmortems, and unfortunately, I've had to play the game too. Yeah,
everyone has an opinion on incidents. I mean, engineers are some of the most opinionated people in any industry, I would guess. So, yeah, I think that the way that we did it at Namely is we found a few people that were like, yeah, this is how we're going to do it. And like they became the internal advocates. And they weren't managers. I think that was also something that helped a lot.
Something we do is we have a tech ops meeting every Monday, and the NOC reports every incident that happened.
Mm-hmm.
A couple incidents. They start an RCA page, and they actually pass that to the owners. So we ask the engineers and the owners to actually start filling out the RCA page. At least at tech ops, we have why something happened, and we have the initial steps. And then we actually follow up the RCA, and it doesn't get done until it's closed. Maybe we're a little luckier, like we don't have it as a political process. Some people didn't like it in the beginning. But now it's pretty normal to have like 3 or 4 incidents at tech ops. And I just had one, and it was like, this is what we're going to fix. This is the status of the tasks. If you do it right, it can be really useful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Bobby, as you mentioned, outcome is greater than ego.
Yep.
Yeah, the politics part's tough. And I think by bringing it to the tech ops meeting also, you just get to see that other people have the same problems. It's like these people had a problem, they had a problem, you had a problem. We make sure we report lost offers on there and everything. So this was the financial cost.
Excellent. Excellent. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Fire away, guys. All right.
Liam just dropped a great link in here for this person that writes write-ups about airline disasters. So
I find it
check it out.
very valuable. It's obviously like very sad what happens, but the importance on the actual investigation of those incidents is like very interesting. It talks about not only the hardware failing, which I suppose in our world is software, but also the state of mind that people are in when these failures occur. So, yeah.
And just a quick question to kind of throw out to the group here. When incidents do occur, I know a lot of people look at as far as the blame game. but it's not as much blame game as it is, hey, how can we work together to get to an outcome? How do you guys really draw that line if somebody just genuinely screws up?
I think for Priceline, if you screw up, it's okay as long as you actually own up to it. But we don't play the blame game. So there is nothing that says, there's nothing in our RCAs that says that a team made a mistake or didn't do the right thing, because that team will do it. The only thing it's down to is this is the factual thing that happened, and these are the tasks that we're going to do to fix it and ensure it doesn't happen. If anybody talks about something being somebody's fault in the meeting, or they play politics, then they'll get shut down. They'll get shut down immediately. That's the important thing. It can't be like it was the SRE team's fault that they didn't look something. You could say that like it was missed for a certain amount of time and we're going to do something to fix it. But if there's any blame, then like our CTO will, you know, from that level down will stop you.
I think it's a big differentiator of you can always see who's doing DevOps the right way and who's doing DevOps kind of the wrong way, bringing over like the bad politics and the, you know, the negative legacy processes that existed before. You know, it's the same thing that's in the Unicorn Project from Gene Kim, where he talks about psychological safety being a huge part of a DevOps transformation of the cultural shift that has to take place. And this is one example of those things. And I think another great, I mean, airlines is scary because a lot of us travel for a living for our jobs, but you know, the Chernobyl, I don't know if you've watched the Chernobyl thing on HBO, but that was absolutely mind blowing when you just watch one incident compound on top of another incident on top of another. And then you would just watch people, the guys looking at the core on the ground going, no, the core can't explode. It's impossible. And he's looking at the core exploded and he's like, no, that's impossible. It can't do it. And it's just the amount of cognitive dissonance that you can get yourself into when you talk about the mindset of what's going on. I remember fat fingering a config on a bunch of fiber channel storage array switches, and I put a new zone in and blew out. I didn't know that they were hubs and not switches, and they could only have one zone at a time. Took down 45 servers instantly and just went, yeah, I actually meant to do that. And then it was just insane. But the cognitive dissonance of not knowing that they were hubs and not switches was just, you have to face that. And then you have to undo what's down in production while it's burning. And you're like, how did I possibly do this? But yeah, it's crazy because you can just get yourself in a mindset where it's like, well, I've been working for 20 hours. That's how I did that. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into doing it, like I think the safe way or the right way, and culture is a big shift that you have to make to make it a safe spot.
I think it's the right architecture too, because like, for example, if you took down an entire site, we would switch to the other site, or same thing with prod config, so we're careful to do around that. But like, as long as you were doing your best and there's a follow-up, then nobody gets in trouble for that.
Also, the other thing that played an important role, I guess, in my last job was change control. If proper change control processes were followed, meaning changes were documented, the risks were documented and presented accurately to the change control board, that took away a lot of the politics of, you know, the blame game was not an issue. It was, okay, it's an honest mistake. Let's learn from it. Let's move forward. But more, I'm not going to say often, but we did have teams that were very ambitious, making changes in the middle of the day, and they caused middle of the day outages. Unfortunately, at that point, you know, you got to hold them accountable for their actions.
Yeah, if they didn't follow procedures, then that's definitely a problem. Yeah. If there can't be a penalty for trying your best to do something, but if you're making a change in the middle of the day in a production system, yeah, you're going to get in trouble for that. And, you know, I'm sure your manager will talk to you. There's still something to be out of that. I mean, still the RCA is that the team's going to follow the procedures and that they'll be held to it.
Absolutely. And even to get away from the technical side, even on a team of recruiters, the way that we work, either you win or you learn. Failure is not an option. That's what it is. As long as there's an action item taken care of at the end of it, as long as there's a real learning experience there, everything else is just going to get everybody better at what they do and translate perfectly into that.
Does everybody here have like a formal RCA process at your company?
Yes.
Yeah, my old company, yeah, it's basically the incident leader that I mentioned earlier. That's a person that's tasked with gathering all the data from all the relevant parties and presenting a formal RCA to the stakeholders and the SDs at that point.
Cool.
Awesome. Bobby, by the way, I love the shirt. Again, you never disappoint on the t-shirts.
Yeah, if folks want one, we'll send it. I just had an old-fashioned go down the wrong tube.
I'm a medium.
Like,
Just saying.
I just have to restart my body to survive. Yeah, so if people want a shirt, we do have them. If you go to, I'll drop a link. The easiest way is to use our Slack integration, but we can find a way to also send folks to this crew as well.
Awesome.
So
Thank you.
I'll find a link. I'll find a link and then drop
That'd be great.
And if you guys do have questions, if you guys do have a need for anything that Fire Hydrant does, I don't recommend companies very often during these meetups. I can't recommend these guys enough. So seriously, if there's a need on the incident response side, you have experts at it. So reach out to Bobby. He will not disappoint.
So Bobby, is it a consulting company, or do you have a software platform? Like, you didn't go into much on either product or offerings. So I'm just curious what you guys actually provide.
Yeah, I try to evangelize through stories a little bit if folks are interested. So what we do, we are a SaaS platform. It's FireHydrant.io, and what we do is we really make it easy to run incidents consistently every single time, and then we provide the tooling to generate these reports and kind of help people step through them. So all the tools that I was mentioning around the 5 whys and timeline, like putting it together a timeline, we make all of that really easy. So when you do go into the aspect of learning about the incident, what went well, what were you wrong about, those types of questions, it's all built into our tool, and then we can generate a PDF or send it around to your business as well.
And if you guys have any Kubernetes questions, there are very few people more qualified than that guy to answer them, even though you might not want to.
I can also, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about Kubernetes, Spinnaker, Istio.
Awesome. For the next meetup, we will have a giveaway. We might have guitar playing, and we're going to make it fun. Any final thoughts? Any other questions anybody might have? Fire away, guys.
Hey, Robert, I was just going to ask, if you want, I can show you what our RCA looks like.
I'd love that.
I don't know if that's interesting to people.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see what you're
able to screen sharing. So.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to like share it privately, or are you saying like right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can share it right now if you guys just want to see it quick.
I'd be curious what it looks like, but you know, I'll say before like others maybe hop off. Like, thanks for coming. Always fun to see familiar faces and everything. So hopefully this talk was fun. I'm going to share the slides, so if you want to toss it around your company, that they'll be available for you there.
Thank you, Ken. We'd love to see that. If those of you guys don't know Ken is one of the senior directors of infrastructure at Priceline, who are doing some really amazing things. So yeah, Ken, I just made you a co-host. If you want to screen share it, fire away, man. That would be awesome.
And we're a travel company, so business is down, but we'll be hiring soon. So
all from a Verity.
That's right. Hey, just an FYI, to look at RCA process that's not political, we have something called a tech ops meeting every week with a full agenda that happens. It's like widely attended by about 50 or 60 people. The first thing we talk about is the RCAs for the week, minor incidents. All of those actually spill over into, like, this is a quarter's worth of RCAs. Every one of these is both a ticket and a follow-up page. And then just one of my RCAs, same thing, was I'm working on this database resiliency to fail my SQL boxes over within 10 seconds when the primary fails or the read-only fails. You can see that we actually report right on there. This is the offers that happen when we had a console issue, like right in your, right out there. The knock tracks time to respond and all the KPIs, and they track all of that. And then like I put down all the observations. We have tickets open, and then this was actually my follow-up for all the different things we want to do to harden this.
Nice.
So if you get the process working well, then it's
right.
So Ken, who's usually driving those, like, who do you guys have involved in those events? Because I've heard a lot of you guys talk about having these incident readouts and everything else. Are you taking the developers' time to do these? Or are you leaving the devs burning down backlog?
No. So the NOC creates an RCA ticket, and they assign it to the product owner that's most responsible for the incident. They're responsible for filling it out, and then setting up a follow-up meeting if they need to do it. The discussion in the tech ops meeting, that's attended by the CTO, the VP of operations, all of the department heads, and most of the relevant engineers and architects. So that's basically like the core of technology. It's probably attended by about 1/6 of all the people in technology. You know, we roll through those RCAs in just a couple minutes. And then those tickets get opened into the backlog. So if the teams decide things, what happens is the TPMs will take it and they'll open those tickets to the various teams that are responsible for it. It'll go on a sprint, you know. In my case, because of console, we had an outage where we just overwhelmed it. So like there's follow-up tasks that get assigned out, and we get to turn it back on when everything is closed out.
That's awesome. That's a pretty mature process.
Yeah, we're also protected pretty well because we have like sort of 2 live sites for every product that we run like hot. So like if a whole data center like literally gets powered off, which has happened because I've been here for a while, or a cloud region goes down because Google goes out, we can usually survive it. So usually like there's a pretty quick mitigation to problems. So we have a lot of freedom to make changes within the process. Because if you go forth and you do break stuff, then typically the mitigation's pretty good. Like we've had full storage arrays crash, and then we're able to just switch over to the site. Anyway, I just thought that was useful to share.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Good stuff, guys. Well, everybody, thank you very, very much for attending. Thanks for the support. Thanks for the participation. I love when these types of conversations can happen organically and everybody kind of throws some thoughts in there. I love this group. We'll do it again next month. And if you guys do need any advice on the job market, if you guys do have any questions, if you want me to take a scan at your resume, I'll gladly tear it to pieces for you. Hit me up on LinkedIn. All you guys have my info. But everybody, seriously, thank you for joining us, and thanks for supporting the group. We'll keep doing these until we could do them in person soon.
All right. All right. See you, everyone.
Have a great night, everybody. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you.
Bobby.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.